What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone, and this time we return with Sonny Vincent. Great to be able to talk with you today, man. Thanks for being here.
Cool, Alex. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it feels like only yesterday I was speaking with you about the Limit record, so it's great to be able to catch up. How have you been in the last couple months?
Hanging in there, just like everyone else, doing my best to deal with the crazy times.
I know exactly what you mean. But it's fair to say you've been on a pretty good creative spree because you just released the Limit album earlier this year, but now we're getting a new solo album, which is Snake Pit Therapy. You want to talk about like how the making of this solo album was, how this album sort of saw the light of day?
Well, yeah. After we finished the Limit album and did all our work, behind it, mixing and got it all prepared, and it came out. I started working on my own stuff again, and I just wanted to do something that represented where where I'm at, and what kind of songs I would bring forth to people. Of course, I was really looking forward to Bobby hearing it, and like when you look at it like a macrocosm, just friends and stuff. But in the bigger picture, I wanted to present it to the public.
Hmm. Do you feel that with like a solo album like this, that there's like more room for creativity because it's strictly your vision as opposed to like The Limit, which is a little bit more collaborative, and other projects you've been involved with, such as Testers, etc.?
Um, I think both can be creative. I don't think that working with other people was was too limiting. Um, I know that when I did do the Snake Pit Therapy album, um, the the nice part was I could kind of sculpt it in exactly how I liked it.
Hmm. Was there maybe like a preconceived idea of what you wanted Snake Pit Therapy to sound like? Was there kind of like an idea you went in mind, or was there like a lot of improvising involved?
Um, I didn't have so many preconceived ideas, although I did have some kind of a framework. A lot of my previous albums would have like a really fast song, just completely overblown, sounding like a chainsaw trying to cut through a body of a tank, steel, and sounding like it's all recorded through a bad telephone or something. And then right next to it would be a very lush ballad with a beautiful feeling. With with this one, you know, I I and a lot of times too, like like when you're recording or you're writing songs, some people can come up with themes of desperation and like frustration, and like I've had a lot of that, and this album still has some desperation in it, but with certain songs I wanted to present a feeling of desperation that could be like universally felt. Like I wanted to offer something to listen to that had some kind of affirmation, like like the difference between, going, oh, fuck this, fuck that, fuck the world, fuck your mom, fuck my house, fuck the dog, fuck the country, fuck, instead of just this complete, you know, desperation of, disassociative, or, like I wanted to offer something that is somehow within the desperation affirmative. So that was maybe some loose framework for some of the songs.
Yeah, well, I've always said that you're one of like the more classier punk rock guys. Rather than saying "fuck this" all the times, you're able to, very how do you say it? Like very articulately explain a disdain for something, or very professionally able to say the F word. I have to say.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
That's one of the best compliments.
yeah. I call you the professional punk.
Cool.
Yeah. But when it comes to like this musical inspiration, like do you ever like have like a chock full of riffs, or like a backlog full of riff ideas or song structures, and you may wonder like, oh, is this more of a solo song, or is this more catered towards the limit, or is this more of a song you want to collaborate with other people on? Like how do you decide what song goes with which project?
It's kind of been the same way throughout because um, when I went solo, like I had the band Testers, and I mean that was a band in that we made a lot of the decisions, together. But then again, I wrote all the songs. I was the singer. The music was my vision. So Testers wasn't a solo project, but there wasn't a lot of collaborative actions in terms of songwriting and this and that. And later on, I had different bands. And I remember I had this one band called Shotgun Rationale, and we had a revolving lineup. Like we had guys from the Beat Suburban in there, and just different people. From this one guy, the drummer that used to be in Tank, like a metal group, he played in Shotgun Rationale. And there was a point to where I was looking at the situation, and God bless him, but the drummer would show up in Germany with his drumsticks and sunglasses on, and go, "Yeah, mate, let's go, let's tour." But he didn't. I had done so much work to get the tour together, like controlling the posters, mailing out this and doing that. So at some point, I just decided to not call it a band and just, call it Sonny Vincent. And that what that brought me was that if I was going to do a recording or do a tour, I could invite people to play with me. So, like one of my last albums, like I guess in 2015 or something, or 2014, was an album called Spiteful. And I just called up some different people and just put it together, and we went in the studio, and that had Rat Scabies from the Damned on drums. It had Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols on bass.
Wow.
And it had Steve McKay from the Stooges on sax.
That's
and we made a whole album.
That needs.
It,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but that has to be an album one day. That is a punk rock supergroup if I've ever heard one.
The album's out. It's called Spite. Yeah. The band was the working title for a band was called Spite, and the album's called Spiteful. And that came out, and we did that in Belgium in a all analog studio, and it came out really cool. But yeah, that's the way it is. Like, for example, on this album, Snake Pit Therapy, I invited different people to play on it. Like, I was working on one song, and I thought, oh, my friend Jamie would play a beautiful solo, like on this particular song. So I called him up, and I said, Jamie, I'm going to send you some, files, and I want you to send me back a solo. So I can do that. So I tour with different people. I record with different people. So like when I did the Limit, that was a little bit different because Bobby wrote a lot of the lyrics. So there was a collaborative process there. But usually I do play with a lot of different people, and it just kind of all comes together as a Sonny Vincent album.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing on how I keep forgetting on just how amazing a saxophone sounds with like a more punk rock or a more raw sound. Like I think one of the best punk rock songs ever is Bondage Up Yours by X-Ray Specs, and like that saxophone that comes in there is just so catchy. And when you see how like a lot of ska bands incorporated it, it just seems like a saxophone is like butter. It just goes with everything.
Yeah, it's true. Like when they came to New York, X-Ray Specs, we did an opening slot for them and met them. That sax player was cool. There was a clothes store across the street called Next, and he went over there, and we were just hanging out with the band, and the sax player and me were talking, and he didn't know anything about punk or X-Ray Specs or nothing, and somebody said, hey man, going to the States, playing CBGBs and here and there and there. Let's go. And so he suddenly was swung on board. But yeah, you're right. The sax in that is amazing. And with Steve McKay, it was like such a honor and such an effortless kind of vibe to have him play on most of the album, and like Steve he just wails on the album. He's just got this swing when he does the sax, and it's just it's incredible.
Yeah, I've always said that punk rock is almost kind of like it has a similar effect, I feel, to like what swing music had in like the early, like in the 40s or the 30s or like the 20s. Like it had that sort of rebellious nature behind it, but there was something so.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Like when I was younger, and my music was more heavy, more like heavy rock, and
Oh,
because that was my kind of formative years. And later, when I started evolving and just trying different approaches, I noticed that there were other bands also trying these different approaches, and so it was kind of wild and kind of wide open. Whereas the earlier stuff was kind of um, the building blocks were very class, so you're kind of like in sort of a form, which was cool, but um, yeah,
yeah.
pretty wild.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. When it comes to like getting that inspiration, do you almost feel like when you play with multiple projects, it's almost like expressing a different side of who you personally are as well as like the limit a different side of Sonny Vincent than Testers, and is that a different side from solo work, etc.?
It's different each time. Like when I made that album with Rat Scabies from the Damned, I didn't know Rat very well. I had met him in London a couple years before, and we went in the studio and jammed together. But then when we were suddenly face to face to make an album, I was all geared up. I had two Vox amplifiers, Y corded together, and facing Rat. He was behind his drums, and like the first thing that I did was I played a riff, sort of like dang dang, bing bang bang, bang bang, damn, wow 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 wow. And I go, bang! Can you do that, you English motherfucker? And he went. Boom, boom. He goes, I sure can, you fucking stupid American. So that's what started our energy flow together. And when I played with Bobby, you know, from Pentagram, we were working on a Limit album. Talking to him on the phone was, like he's going, I love your songs. I love the melodic passages where you make it raw but still bring in some kind of melodic stuff. I want to do that. I'm really interested in you doing that. I said, okay, I'll produce, and I'll get that. I'll be the producer. But when we got to the point of making the album, Bobby's used to calling all the shots, and like I really had to like it was like in the beginning, like he would sing a song, and I was like, "Hey, Bobby, on this part, I want you to go. I want to do a little refrain. Oh, kitty, kitty, not so pretty." And he was going, oh, wait a second," and I had to push him out of the way of the microphone physically to show him what I wanted him to do and what we were going to do on this kind of chorusy part. And it took about 3 songs till he kind of loosened up and said, this might be going good. But at first, it was two guys that are used to calling all the shots trying to find their way. We did find our way. So, but with each group of musicians, it's kind of a different approach. I mean, there was one lineup that I did a tour all across America and Canada. We were called the Bad Reactions, and those guys were from Georgia, and they were just so badass. They were very, I don't know, just locked into the vibe and to the beat and to the feel. So that was a really cool tour. But yeah, it's different with each person,
Yeah.
each configuration.
And I wanted to circle back to like the meaning of punk rock because as somebody who has played with different punk rock musicians and has seen its evolution for such a long time, I mean, like, what do you think makes punk punk? Because like, I was born in 1993, so the bands that are labeled as punk rock have a very different, sound, a very different appearance, even a different sort of like ideology, but it's all categorized as punk rock, like the Sex Pistols or Rancid or you name it. So, like, to you, what makes something? Is there something that a punk rock band always has to have in order for it to be considered punk?
That's a tough question because there's a lot of young bands that are out that are under the radar. That the thousands and thousands of bands that connect to and resonate with the punk and what it was back in the day. And so to a lot of musicians, it's like, who's that fucking kid dressed up like that? And he's not from back in the day. But I'm a little bit different. Like I've always felt that somebody connects to something in their soul or in their feelings, and it resonates with them. They have a right to tell their story as well. And I think some people, can tell the difference between something authentic and something that's contrived, whether it's new or from back then. The the cool thing about the earlier days in punk was that in the very beginning, um, it was kind of like punk wasn't something you become. Punk was something you were all along, like in school. You might have been in trouble, or you might have left school, or this was something that you were before they even had the word punk. And then I remember being in CBGBs and Maxes, and I'd call the old posses back home, and I'd say, "Dude, man, you got to come down to these clubs. There's tons of people like us, you know, here, And of course, they all went on to have families or in jail or something and didn't really come down. But it was just a kind of an epiphany to see the rawness and the kind of commitment to, owning something that was original.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I was having a philosophy talk about this. I'm friends with a lot of people in the New York hardcore scene, and we're like having a talk. Like, punk fought against every single cliche that was there, but like eventually punk did have like its own image, and it had its own like sense of fashion and its own imagery, and really its ultimate lifestyle. So. I was always worried, did maybe like there become sort of like a conformist attitude in punk, which ultimately denounce that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. I read an article by Steve Jones, the guitar player from the Sex Pistols, and he said that his initial feeling about what they were doing was that people should be free to, express and to dress and to be who they are. He said, but of course, after they did a number of shows, if he wore a certain kind of scarf on his head, then the next show he'd see 20 kids in the audience with that scarf on his head because there's a certain amount of, a certain amount of people that just want to assimilate. But um, talking about the hardcore scene, that for me, when the hardcore scene came out, was very rewarding to me. I like Testers, my original band. We we had them. I mean, compared to most of the other bands, our themes were kind of dark. Our songs were more angular and more aggressive, and so a lot of the stuff that was called punk. Um, like when you want to talk about how you were saying, like having a philosophical discussion, like there's just different shades of what punk is within a group. Like the Ramones were punk in their attitude and the lyrics and everything, but the actual songs were a little bit sometimes like the Beach Boys. They're great, but like rock, rock, rock away, beach, super melodic. I thought they should have been giant hits.
Yeah.
But and people considered Blondie kind of punk, which they were in their attitude, but Testers had songs about suicide and like there just was this kind. We had this music that was not warm and fuzzy where you could wrap your arms around it and feel nice and oh I love it. It was a little bit not scary, but I would say just unorthodox in terms of the aggression and the feeling and the feeling of disenfranchisement directly in
Yeah.
the music, not like just in your clothing or something. And it's like when the hardcore scene sprung up, I thought, yeah, that's more in the direction of what Testers were doing rather than what, say, Blondie was doing,
Yeah.
or Elvis Costello or something.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, is Madonna was even like cutting her teeth in the punk scene before she became, the massive queen of pop that she is. And like
Yep.
I'm 28 years old, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
I was discovering what is labeled as punk through Z100 radio stations, which to like the purists that is not punk at all, and it's almost sacrilege to even consider it that. But again, I think like punk is subjective. And what I've noticed about the scene is, there's the famous saying, misery loves company. And I almost think that, like, this camaraderie that we felt in the punk rock scene is just everybody's equally pissed off. And maybe if that's what brought them together, they don't want anything to tear that apart.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. It was very much like that.
Mhm. And the final question I wanted to ask you is as an artist who did cut their teeth in New York City at CBGBs and checking out all these legendary clubs that are a lot of them no longer with us. But I mean, I don't know how often you've come to New York City or if you're still based out here, but like, I think that there's a great happening scene right now, but like, do you think that there could be a resurgence, especially in the times that we're living in? Everybody's pissed off now. Can you see maybe like a resurgence of like a scene as classic as it was in the 70s and the 80s and so on?
Sure, anything can happen with that. I think there still is kind of a underground, under the radar scene, and like you said, in New York, there's a lot of people that are playing that have a lot of cool like angst and desperation in their music. It's hard to say, you know, because it's hard to define. It's like like even back in the day, you could see, like there was this core of bands that were, excuse me, that were kind of punk, but then there were people that would come out and they would see like, okay, what is punk? Okay, maybe I have to have more jerky movements on stage and do weird things and act a little bit, crazy, or bring in the kitchen sink and just act, off base, and there was a lot of that, people that saw the scene and thought it was something to assume. For me, I kind of always live in my own philosophical bubbles, and it was funny because when I started playing with some of the very famous English punk people, like I made a couple of albums with Captain Sensible, from the Damned and stuff, and I'd be sitting around talking to them, and I'd be talking like as if we were they were the same as the New York bands. Like the New York bands were kind of struggling and trying to do it, like call to arms, and it's like, whereas I didn't have as much experience with the English scene. I mean, I knew it was huge, but I never put two and two together that a lot of the early English punk bands sold tons of records to all these kids that were punks all over England. And so it wasn't the same experience like, say, the MC5, like they got their bands together and they got fabulously famous and made some decent money very quickly because the whole country was proselytized and went all punk, whereas groups like the MC5 and the Sonic Rendezvous and, like Destroy All Monsters, and then later a lot of the New York punk bands, there wasn't that kind of success, only for a few, like Blondie and, bands like that. But, even the Ramones, they had to tour endlessly because they needed to make money that way, because their albums didn't really sell as big as, people thought,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
um,
It's
you know,
funny.
I,
My generation thinks the Ramones are like on the level of like Kiss on how big that they are because I've discovered so many Ramones songs through just video games alone. Like I pretty much it was everywhere. Like I would hear them through video games, I would hear them in movies, I would hear them through a lot of mediums. So like I always thought like, wow, this must have been one of the biggest bands like AC/DC or Queen or the Stones or something like that. And then I realized no, they were fucking playing in shitholes.
they did some great concerts. They were huge, in Argentina and stuff. But generally speaking, they had to tour their whole lives away. I know, like, and even bands like the Damned, like the kind of success they initially had, and then when you spread it out throughout a career, like Captain told me a story about how they always tried a lot of mechanisms to advance themselves, in that group to get more popular. So, and they were a headlining band, but once in a while they would do an opening slot. And so they tried to open for Rob Zombie on a huge tour. And what a lot of the bigger bands do to the opening bands is they limit the amount of PA they can use. They limit the amount of the light show they can use. So the Damned came on, and they had very little production in terms of how the sound came over to the audience. So they sounded kind of like a rinky-dink tractor, compared to when Rob Zombie came on, because he came on and the entire PA was on. There was a digital bass drum, and suddenly the lights and the smoke, and then he comes out from the swamp, and it's like it made the Damned look like homemade bullshit. You know what I mean? And they're not.
Yeah.
But it so they tried a lot of stuff. The point being that a lot of the bands, like you were saying, you could imagine when you first heard the Ramones that they were fabulously set and wealthy. But I knew Joey personally, and I knew them all except for Johnny. And Joey did the stock market. He was pretty good at that, so he could get money from that. They were endlessly on the road, so they didn't have it so easy. They had a hard road in front of them all the time.
That and that is true punk rock. So
Yeah.
before we go, I want to thank you so much again for your time. Great to talk to you as always. Is there just anything else you would like to promote for the release of Snake Pit Therapy? When this fucking bullshit virus that shall not be named obviously is behind us, can we maybe be expecting to see you take this on the road?
Well, I'm gonna probably make another album. Hopefully that'll come out just in time to do some gigs. I've got a book out now that's also called Snake Pit Therapy, which is kind of cool because I spoke to the record company and the book publisher. I said, "Well, won't that seem weird?" But they said, "No, it's kind of interesting." But they're not connected in any way except by title. But there's a book that I wrote called Snake Pit Therapy that's out now that people can get from Amazon. And of course, the album is out any day now. It can be pre-ordered. They almost sold all of the albums now in the pre-order phase
Oh,
from
sweet.
my Snake Pit Therapy album. So if people want to get it, I think they have to look around on the internet and see which store that they order from and get it, because they already ordered a repress. But because of the pandemic, the repressing of an album takes 7 months now.
Oh
And
God.
there's all these complications because the the United States gets these pellets, these plastic PVC pellets from Asia, and they stopped coming, and that's what they make the records out of. So if someone wants to grab my album, they have to grab it from what's left of the first pressing, and there's not many of those left. It's like cool that it's almost sold out during the first pressing, but I know that they did send some to distributors, so they'll wind up listed in certain record stores and stuff. So the people that really want to grab one can just search around and find out where they can get one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Sonny Vincent. Be sure to check out Snake Pit Therapy, both the album and the book. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.